All right, I'm gonna take that as a yes. So first of all, I know it's confusing, but I just got married, so I'm in the process of changing my name. So my new name is McCarthy, but I know it says on my thing Bloesch, so sorry about that. But Zoe, the Zoe stays the same. I'm actually sitting at Nick's old desk in our lab, so that's fun. I'm in the third year of my PhD at Uni of New South Wales in Sydney. I'm working on Setocoris, a genus of the Muridae. They're kleptoparasitic bugs on carnivorous plants. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my project and describe the system and then tell you a few things I found out. Yeah, and my supervisors are Jerry Cassis, Dan Murphy, and Dita Hoculi. So first of all, I have to tell you about the bug's habitat, which is a carnivorous plant, the Drosera genus. These are important carnivorous plants. Charles Darwin used them to propose that carnivory existed in plants. The story is he was walking around on the moors near his house and he kept seeing this Drosera rotundifolia, and he got really interested in it. Him and his son did some experiments on it and were able to show that it did digest and absorb nutrients from insects. And so on the left, there's a page from his book Insectivorous Plants with illustrations of Drosera rotundifolia. So Drosera have flypaper style traps. Their leaves are covered with hairs that have glands on the ends that secrete sticky mucilage. And then when a little insect comes along and lands on it, it gets stuck in the sticky stuff. The plant then produces digestive enzymes and uh, absorbs the nutrients from the insect through the leaf surface. And there's about 200 species of Drosera. It's the biggest group of carnivorous plants. And Australia has the vast majority of the diversity. There's about 150 species of Drosera in Australia, and most of them occur where I assume Nick is right now, in Western Australia because they have very weathered soils and it's like a hotspot for carnivorous plant diversity. But there's also some Drosera on the East Coast where I am, and they're the ones that I'm working on. These, I'm going to show you the Drosera that are on the East Coast. This is Drosera lunata, and there's four other species that are part of a species complex on the East Coast that all look like this. So they're upright and they have round leaves that are covered with sticky hairs. And on that close up, you can see a little insect that's been caught on the leaf. The other plant that I'm working on is Drosera binata, that's also on the East Coast. They're also upright and they've got long, thin leaves that are covered with sticky hairs. So obviously, not every insect gets caught by the plant. The Setocoris, this is a Setocoris banatophilus, is a true bug who is highly adapted to living in the sticky terrain. There's about 20 species. Most of them are undescribed, and we only know them from Australia. The most of the species occur in Western Australia, same as the plants, because it's a hotspot for biodiversity. There's about 5 species that occur on the east coast of Australia, that I'll be looking at. So, like some other myriads, Setocoris have evolved carnivory. They use the Drosera plant like a spider uses its web. They sit there until a little insect gets caught on the plant and then they run over and they feed on it. And I've seen them, like, sometimes they respond quite quickly when you put a little prey item on the plant. On the left, there's a big green Setocoris that's about to start feeding on a little wasp that got caught. And on the right, that's a Setocoris bug at the top, and it's got its mouth part inserted into a hoverfly who's been caught by the plant. So there's different theories about what exactly the nature of this interaction is. We normally say it's kleptoparasitism, but we're really not exactly sure because there are also suggestions that the bugs may benefit the plant. So these are some central questions for my research and about the system in general. Is it mutualism or parasitism? And are the Setocoris bugs obligates or opportunists? And there's quite a few examples of carnivorous plant and insect interactions that all fall across this spectrum. And actually, Nick beat me to it because he mentioned those pitcher plants he's working on that have the fly larvae living in them. So first of all, you've probably heard of the Pamaridia bug. It lives on a sticky plant called Rigula. They say this plant's proto-carnivorous because it can't produce digestive enzymes, but the bug feeds on the things that are stuck on the plant. It poos on the plant, and then the plant absorbs nutrients from the bug's poo. So it's sort of an external digestive system. So this is a clear case of mutualism. Then there's opportunists. Ants are a really common one for sticky plants, and they often steal stuff off of Drosera. In this photo, there's some ants stealing a prey item off a Drosera leaf. Most ants that do this are just opportunists. It's just, yeah, easy pickings for them. And finally, you get some proper obligates as well. So there's a group of flies called Fletcherimia, or however you say that, that lay their eggs in the pitcher, same as the ones Nick was talking, well, similar to the ones Nick was talking about, of pitcher plants. The larvae live in the fluid in the pitcher plant, and they swim around and they feed on whatever insects get caught in there. And then when they're adults, they fly off. So they are considered kleptoparasites because they effectively steal nutrients from the plant when they fly away. So the main question of my research is, are Setocoris and Drosera co-diversifying? And to know this, I need to understand how the interaction works, like I was talking about in the last slide. The main things I'm going to do for my research is construct a comparative phylogeography. I'm working on that at the moment. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm still, analyzing the data, but I want to see whether sympatric bugs and plants have the same pattern of diversity across their range, the same amount of divergence between different populations. So as evidence for if they're on the same evolutionary trajectory, whether they may be co-diversifying or co-speciating. I'm also going to do some experimentation. I have some plants and Setocoris bugs in the glasshouse, and I'm feeding them the plants crickets. Some of them have bugs on them and some don't. Marcos knows about this because I've been making him feed the bugs for me while I'm away. And I want to see whether there's any evidence that having bugs stealing their food is harmful to the plants. I'm going to do some color matching analysis because, as you saw on the first slide, there's really obvious red and green morphs within each species of Setocoris bug. There's also red and green morphs of each plant species. So I want to see whether the bugs tend to match the plant they're on and whether that's maybe an inherited trait. And finally, what I'm going to talk about today is some natural history work because I just have nice photos for it. And that's the most cohesive thing I have to talk about at the moment. So I want to know how Setocoris are adapted to their host plant, and I want to know if they really steal nutrients from their host plant. All this will help support the evidence I find through the phylogeography by giving a bit of natural history and ecological context. So this is a map of Australia. I live in Sydney, and all the black dots are where I've done field work on the East Coast in the last couple of years. And there's some photos there from my fieldwork. Those are my parents at the top. They're very long-suffering volunteers of mine because they're keen and they have a big car and camping equipment. And at the bottom right, that's me and Dad standing on a path that we meant to go down a few weeks ago, and it's just totally flooded. I'm actually in the field on a field trip right now, north of Sydney. We're meant to be camping, but it's really hot and humid. So I'm in an Airbnb and the trip's almost over and I'm really excited to not be wading through swamps anymore. So yeah, and in the course of this field work, I've made a lot of observations and taken photos that have added to the natural history knowledge that we have. So first of all, how are they adapted to their hosts? Well, the most obvious way is that they have to not get eaten by their host. And like many bugs, they're adapted to living on hairy plants. And then in particular, these hairs are sticky. So I don't know if I assume you'll be able to see this little video of a bug walking on a plant. And you can see that when it starts walking, I'll play it again. it's standing on the hairiest part of the leaf. It's actually holding on to the hairs. And then it moves into the middle of the leaf where the hairs are shorter. And so it can walk by making contact with the leaf surface. But um, it actually grabs onto the hairs with its claws and it holds onto the hairs below where the sticky part is. So it doesn't get stuck. And if they're trying to run away from me, they normally go onto like the part of the leaf that has the fewest hairs or the stalk so they can move quickly. But I have noticed in the glass house, if I put a bug onto the hairiest part of the plant, the stickiest part, it moves quite easily and it'll just get away from me. So they are highly adapted to locomotion in this environment. Another part of this is host use. So on the left there are the two main species that they live on the east coast of Australia. So they're known hosts. On the right there, that's Drosera speculata. I meant to put the name underneath, I forgot. And that often grows right next to the other plants. It's about the size of a coin and it lies flat on the ground. And often you'll see either of those other upright species and a heap of the red one right underneath it. And so you would think, like, why wouldn't the Setocoris bug go down onto the other species and also forage there? But we never see Setocoris on the right-hand species. And so it obviously has marked host preferences. We're not exactly sure why that is, but some theories are that maybe the upright Drosera plants offer more protection from predators. Also, I kind of suspect it has something to do with the hairs. Like, for example, maybe the Drosera that it doesn't like have wider hairs, and so they're unable to like clutch onto those with their claws, which would mean they wouldn't be able to walk without getting stuck. So that's something somebody could look into in the future that I think might be important. And finally, a big part of using the plant as the host is that it's not always a suitable host or a suitable habitat. The picture on the left is a close-up of a Drosera binata leaf, and you can see there's big clear globs of sticky mucilage at the end of each hair. So I would say that's good habitat because prey would get stuck there and there would be food availability for the Setocoris bug. Whereas on the right, that leaf's all dried up and it wouldn't be catching any prey. The Drosera, they come up only part of the year when it's, well, here it's in spring and summer when it's wet and warm. And then they die back to a tuber. Well, the species I'm looking at die back to a tuber after that. And even during the time that they're up, they're not always sticky. Like if a leaf has caught a certain number of prey, it'll die off, or just as it ages, it'll die off. So it's really a restricted amount of time that it's suitable habitat. And so I wanted to look more into this. So I tracked some populations over spring and summer at the same locations. I visited them every fortnight and I looked at how sticky the plants were. So I counted the number of sticky leaves. And so these two graphs are for two different sites of Drosera peltata. It's the one with the little round leaves. And you can see that in September, which is spring for us, that's when there was the most number of sticky leaves. That's when I started visiting, and then it falls off. So the Drosera peltata is really sometimes up for only a month or two, and sometimes doesn't come up at all. I went on a field trip late last year, inland Queensland, and we didn't find a single plant because it was really dry. So yeah, they're quite ephemeral. They're not technically ephemeral, but they kind of, in nature, they are. And then I also looked at two populations of Drosera binata at nearby sites. So they're the ones with the long leaves, and their leaves started getting sticky in October and continued through into summer. So they become sticky later than the peltata, and they also last longer. And then I recorded when I first saw Setocoris nymphs emerge on these plants. And I've put a little bug there when they emerge. And so on the peltata, I saw the bugs emerge in September or early October. And then on the binata, I saw them emerge in, I can't see that on my screen, November, early mid-November. So that's really interesting because maybe there's really specific level of adaptation to their host where the same species of bugs emerge earlier on Drosera peltata than they do on Binata because it's more suitable habitat. Or it might not be as interesting as that and they might be host switching. So the bugs don't fly very far. Some of them don't really fly at all. They sort of jump around, but these populations are quite close to each other in one national park. So they could move between the different plant species. And it's possible that the nymphs come out earlier on Drosera peltata. And then once that plant's no longer suitable habitat, they move on to Binata. That's also possible. And it might just be that those nymphs that hatch early on Drosera binata don't survive, so I don't see them. So we're not sure which one of those it is, but it's very interesting. And it's also interesting that they only use these two plants as hosts because that this plant on the right that I was talking about before is around for a lot longer than either of those, and we never see bugs on them. So next up is, do Setocoris actually steal nutrients from their host plants? And this is someone else's research. Laura Skate submitted her PhD thesis in 2021, and she was working on Setocoris bugs that live on a different carnivorous plant called Biblis. But it's similar to the Drosera. It has these long, sticky leaves. And she was tracking the movement of labeled nitrogen from Drosophila flies that had been fed with the nitrogen into the plant via Setocoris poo. And so she did this cool experiment where she put the labeled flies on the plant and then she excluded Setocoris from some of them and she allowed Setocoris to feed on others. And then she looked at the nitrogen in the leaves and she found that, yes, some of the leaf nitrogen was derived from Setocoris poo, but it was kind of hard to say whether that was a significant amount and whether the leaf Setocoris were better or worse off. So there's more work to be done about this. One thing I have found to do with this question is that the Setocoris often get consumed by the plant. So these are some photos of Setocoris that have died. The one at the top left, it's fresh looking. So that bug's just died, but it's stuck on the plant. And then the other two photos, they're in various stages of decomposition. The one at the bottom, you can barely tell it's a Setocoris, but I'm pretty sure it is. So I'm not sure if this usually occurs because the bug makes a mistake and has an untimely death, or when they reach the end of their life and they get digested by the plant. I suspect that it's usually because they died naturally, because I have only seen a nymph being digested by the plant one time. But either way, even though the Setocoris are stealing the plant's food from it their whole life, they often do get digested by the plant. So it might be more of a closed system or a mutualism than we suspected, because initially we thought, yeah, it's definitely kleptoparasitism. In any case, I'm going to be looking for more evidence about this with my glass experiment. Hopefully we'll be able to see a difference between plants that have Setocoris and those that don't. And that's all I've got for today. So thanks for listening, and thanks to all these people who've helped me so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your talk. Kind of feel myself a bit in that when feeding your bugs in the